everyone, and welcome to English Passage Podcast, where we focus on improving your English through meaningful, natural, and deeply relatable conversations that reflect real-life situations and emotions. And today, I'm especially excited because I am joined by my co-host Arav, who is not only a great conversational partner, but also someone who is very honest about his experiences, which makes our discussions more real and engaging.
Thank you, Mira. Although I have a feeling that today's topic might reveal more about my bad habits than I am prepared to admit.
That's exactly what makes this conversation interesting. Have you ever found yourself saying, "I will definitely start tomorrow," while fully knowing deep inside that tomorrow might come with the same excuses, the same delays, and the same lack of action?
Mira, I feel like you just described a daily pattern in my life, and I'm sure many listeners are silently agreeing right now.
Arav, instead of defining procrastination in a simple way, let's explore what actually happens inside your mind when you delay something important. Because I believe that understanding the internal process is much more valuable than just labeling the habit.
Yes, and if I try to describe that honestly, I would say that when I have an important task in front of me, especially something that requires focus, effort, or creativity, I immediately start feeling a kind of resistance, almost as if my mind is trying to protect me from discomfort.
That's very interesting, because what you are describing sounds less like laziness and more like an emotional reaction to the task itself, which suggests that procrastination might actually be connected to how we feel rather than what we need to do.
Exactly. And in that moment, instead of directly starting the task, I begin to look for something easier, something more enjoyable, or something that gives me instant satisfaction, like checking my phone, watching short videos, or even organizing things that are not urgent.
So, in a way, you are replacing a difficult task with an easy activity, which creates the illusion of productivity while actually avoiding the real responsibility.
Yes. And what makes it worse is that while I am doing those easy activities, there is always a part of my mind reminding me that I am delaying something important, which slowly builds pressure and guilt.
And that guilt doesn't motivate you. It actually makes it harder to start, right?
Yes, because the longer I wait, the bigger the task feels in my mind. And instead of becoming easier, it becomes more intimidating, which leads to even more delay.
If we look deeper into this pattern, it seems that procrastination is not really about time management, but about emotional management. Because you are not avoiding the task itself, but the feeling associated with the task.
Yes, and when I think about it carefully, I realize that sometimes I delay tasks not because they are difficult, but because I'm afraid of doing them imperfectly, or not meeting my own expectations.
So, would you say that perfectionism is connected to procrastination?
Absolutely. Because when you set very high standards for yourself, starting becomes more difficult, since you feel that whatever you do might not be good enough, which creates hesitation.
That means the habit is not just behavioral, it is deeply psychological.
Mira, when you talk about overthinking, I feel like many people experience it, but they may not fully understand how it affects their daily actions. So, could you walk us through your thought process in a real situation?
Yes, and I will describe it step by step. Because overthinking is not just one thought. It is a chain of continuous analysis that keeps expanding.
I'm very interested in this.
Let's say I want to send a simple message to someone, something that should normally take just a few seconds. But instead of sending it immediately, I begin to analyze every word, every tone, and every possible interpretation.
So you are not just thinking about what you want to say, but also about how it will be received.
Exactly. And then my mind starts creating multiple versions of the same message, comparing them, judging them, and questioning whether they are appropriate, polite, clear, or even necessary.
That sounds like a full mental debate for a single message.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And the problem is that this process consumes time, energy, and confidence. Because even after sending the message, I might still think about it again. Let's now imagine a detailed workplace situation, because this is where bad habits can have serious consequences over time.
Yes, and I think this will be very relatable for many listeners.
Imagine you are part of a professional team, and you are assigned an important task with a clear deadline. But instead of starting early, you delay it, thinking that you still have enough time to complete it later.
That's a very common mindset.
As time passes, the urgency increases. But instead of starting calmly, you feel pressure, which affects your focus and decision-making ability.
Yes, and then you rush the work at the last moment.
And when you rush, the quality decreases, which means the final result does not reflect your true potential.
And then your manager or colleagues might assume that you are careless or not committed, even though the reality is that your habit, not your ability, caused the problem.
Let's now challenge excuses in a deeper and more honest way, because I think this is where most people get stuck without realizing it.
Yes, because excuses feel very convincing when we say them.
Let's take a common excuse. I'm too tired. When you say that, what do you actually mean?
Sometimes I mean that I don't feel like putting in effort, even if I physically have the energy.
That's a very honest answer.
And I've noticed that even when I say I'm tired, I can still spend hours watching videos or scrolling on my phone, which means I am not truly exhausted.
So the issue is not energy. It's resistance to effort.
Exactly, and once I realized that, I started questioning my own excuses more carefully.
That's powerful, because awareness changes behavior.
Yes, because now when I say I'm tired, I ask myself, am I really tired? Or am I just avoiding discomfort?
That question alone can create change. Now let's build a very practical and realistic system for change, because motivation alone is not enough to break long-term habits.
Yes, because motivation comes and goes.
Exactly. So instead of depending on motivation, we need a system that works even when we don't feel like doing anything.
That sounds important. How do we build that?
First, we start with awareness, where we clearly identify the habit without judging ourselves, because understanding comes before change.
That makes sense.
Second, we reduce the difficulty of action, meaning we start with something so small that it feels almost impossible to avoid.
Can you give a practical example?
Yes, instead of saying, I will work for 2 hours, you say, I will work for 5 minutes, because starting is often the hardest part.
That feels much easier to begin.
And once you start, continuing becomes easier.
So the goal is not intensity, it is consistency.
Exactly.
And what happens after consistency?
Then discipline becomes natural, because repetition turns effort into habit.
I think one important truth is that bad habits are not always about laziness. They are sometimes connected to emotions like stress, confusion, or lack of direction.
Yes, and that is why we should approach change with patience and understanding, rather than harsh self-judgment.
Because real growth takes time.
And consistency. Today's tip is to describe your habits in English every day, using long and connected sentences, because this will improve both your fluency and your ability to express complex ideas.
For example, instead of saying, I procrastinate, you can say, I often delay important tasks because I feel overwhelmed and choose easier activities instead.
What do you think about this topic?
Share your thoughts in the comments.
And don't forget to subscribe to English Passage Podcast for more English conversations.